I was 22, and she was my friend's mom. I didn't know a single evening could feel so dangerous. I don't even know why I followed her upstairs that night. Maybe it was the way she said, "Could you help me with the boxes?" Like she didn't expect anyone to actually say yes. Her room smelled faintly of cedar and something floral, not perfume exactly, just her. There were stacks of books on the dresser, a coffee mug half finished beside them, lipstick smudged at the rim. Everything about the space looked lived in, soft, a little messy, but warm in the kind of way that makes you forget how late it is. She bent down to move the first box, muttering something about how her son never helps with this kind of thing. I shouldn't have noticed how the back of her sweater lifted just slightly, revealing a thin line of skin. But I did, and once I noticed, it was impossible not to see everything else. How careful she was with her movements, how she always filled silences before they became awkward. "I can take that," I said, reaching past her. My hand brushed hers, just a second, maybe less, but she froze. A heartbeat later, she smiled like nothing happened. "You're stronger than you look," she said lightly, turning away before I could answer. Her tone was playful, but there was something behind it, an edge, a quiet awareness that didn't belong in small talk. The rain outside had turned heavier, drumming against the window in uneven rhythms. She glanced at it, then back at me. "You can wait until it slows down," she said, voice softer now. "No point getting soaked." So I stayed. She sat on the edge of the bed, pulling her sleeves down to her wrists, fidgeting with the loose thread near the cuff. I stood by the window pretending to look at the rain, but really I was listening, to the faint creak of the mattress, to her quiet sighs, to the soft click of her ring as she twisted it back and forth. "What are you thinking about?" she asked suddenly. The question startled me more than it should have. "Nothing," I said too quickly. She smiled without looking at me, like she already knew the truth. I wanted to tell her that I noticed things, how she avoided mirrors when she walked by, how she laughed too quickly, how her voice dropped a little whenever she said goodnight. But I didn't. I just stood there, hands in my pockets, feeling the weight of everything unspoken filling the space between us. The rain eased. The silence didn't. She reached for the lamp and dimmed it halfway, the room slipping into a muted gold. "There," she said, almost to herself. "Better, isn't it?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure if she was talking about the light or the fact that I hadn't left. And for the first time that night, neither of us tried to fill the quiet. The rain had stopped, but neither of us moved. She sat on the bed, still twisting that ring around her finger, round and round, like she was trying to undo time itself. "You don't have to stay, you know," she said after a while. "It's late." Her voice was casual, but her shoulders stayed tense, hands motionless now. "I don't mind," I said. She smiled faintly, not at me, but at the floor. "You always say that. Like it's easy." I didn't know what to do with that. There was something in her tone that made my chest tighten, a tiredness that didn't belong to the moment. Her name slipped out before I meant it to. "Claire." She looked up slowly, and the sound of her name between us felt heavier than the silence that followed. For a second, she seemed to forget to breathe. Then she stood, brushing invisible dust off her jeans. "Your friend, you said he's back tomorrow?" "Yeah," I said. "He texted me earlier. Said he might cut the trip short." Her eyes flickered, barely noticeable, but I saw it. The calculation. The awareness. So this was the line we were both pretending not to see. "He doesn't talk about you much anymore," I added quietly. "Not since he moved out." "That's probably for the best," she said, her voice low now. "He doesn't need to worry about me." She tried to laugh, but it cracked halfway through. She turned toward the dresser, reaching for a framed photo. I caught a glimpse. Her son, maybe 15, grinning with braces and a summer tan. She touched the frame once, then set it down face first. The gesture felt like a confession. "You ever think," I started, "that some people only notice you when you stop needing them?" Her breath hitched, just slightly. Then she said, "You're too young to talk like that." Maybe, but I'd been watching her long enough to know that age had nothing to do with loneliness. She brushed past me to open the window. Cool air drifted in, carrying the smell of wet asphalt and pine. Her arm brushed mine, not an accident this time. Not really. For a moment, we both stood there, pretending to look outside. "You're quiet tonight," she said. I wanted to tell her that it was because everything I could say would sound wrong. Too much, too soon, too dangerous. Instead, I said, You're different when it rains. Her lips parted like she might answer, but she didn't. She just looked at me. Really looked, for the first time all night. Her eyes softened, then darted away. She reached for the lamp again, turning it even lower until the room was nearly shadowed. Maybe you should get some sleep, she whispered. Her hand brushed mine as she reached past to set the mug aside. Neither of us moved. And in that inch of space, that unbearable, trembling pause, every reason to stop felt suddenly smaller than the one not to. The next morning, I told myself I wouldn't go. I told myself that the evening before had been a one-time thing. Rain, fatigue, proximity, that it only felt like something because the silence between us had stretched too long. But by late afternoon, I found myself standing in the same cafe where she worked a few shifts a week. I didn't even drink coffee that often. She was behind the counter, tying her hair back. Sleeves rolled, a smudge of milk foam on her wrist. She didn't see me at first. Her laugh, low, effortless, carried across the room when a customer made a bad joke. It wasn't the kind of laugh you could fake. I waited until the line thinned. When she noticed me, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or something she tried to hide behind a practiced smile. You again, she said, voice light but eyes guarded. Are you stalking me now? Maybe, I said, half smiling. Depends how strong your coffee is. She laughed, really laughed this time, and for a heartbeat it felt almost normal. She leaned forward on the counter, lowering her voice. You don't sleep much, do you? Not lately. Thinking too much. I shrugged, trying not to. The pause that followed was long enough to feel like an answer. She reached for a cup, wrote my name on it, slow, deliberate, and when she handed it to me, her fingers brushed mine again. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. I didn't think I'd see you today, she said quietly. I wasn't planning to come. So what changed? I don't know. I did know, but saying it out loud would make it real. Her phone buzzed on the counter beside her, a name flashing across the screen. She glanced at it, and her whole posture shifted. The brightness drained from her face. You should get that, I said. She shook her head. It's just my ex. He still forgets that done means done. The bitterness in her voice startled me. Before I could say anything, the barista at the far end called out, Claire, double latte for pickup. She flinched like the sound had snapped her out of something. Right? She murmured, stepping away. I watched her move, brisk, contained, every motion controlled again. When she came back, the easy warmth between us had dimmed. I should get back, she said, not meeting my eyes. I nodded, but I didn't move. The cafe suddenly felt too bright, too crowded. Hey, I said before she could turn away. Last night. She froze. Don't, she whispered. The word wasn't angry. It was scary, or maybe protective, of herself, of me, of whatever fragile thing we'd almost named. I took a breath, but no sound came out. She looked at me then, really looked, and said, softer now, you don't know what this would cost. Then her coworker called her name again, and she was gone, back behind the counter, smile perfectly intact. I stood there holding the cup she'd written my name on. The ink had smeared slightly where her finger touched it. I shouldn't have gone back. I knew it. Still, there I was, hovering by the counter as she finished wiping down the tables, her movements meticulous, precise, almost like she was trying to erase any trace of the morning. Hey, I said, voice too low, too deliberate. She turned slowly, holding a rag in one hand, a coffee cup in the other. The corners of her mouth lifted, but her eyes didn't follow. They stayed somewhere beyond me, a quiet distance I couldn't reach. Hey, she echoed, a little too carefully. I stepped closer, close enough to notice the faint scent of her perfume mixed with brewed coffee, warm and subtle, but entirely her. My stomach tightened, and I had to remind myself to breathe. You looked different yesterday, I said, fumbling with my words. When the rain. She stopped, set the cup down. Don't, she said sharply, not cruelly, but enough to make me hesitate. I wasn't going to, I said quickly, and immediately regretted it. We stood there, the air thick with unspoken sentences. My hand twitched at my side, brushing against my jeans, uselessly fidgeting. Her fingers hovered over the rag, pausing in midair. I wanted to reach out, to say everything I couldn't. But the moment felt dangerous, fragile. I could see the pulse in her neck, hear it in the quiet between us, hear the almost silence of my own heartbeat pounding. Why do you keep coming back? she asked suddenly, voice lower now, almost a whisper. I swallowed. I don't. No. Her gaze found mine, slow, steady, weighing. And for a fraction of a second, the world shrank to that look. My hand twitched again, closer this time, like it might brush hers if I dared. She looked away, blinking, and then back again. There was something in her eyes, fear, maybe, or curiosity, or something I couldn't name. We shouldn't, she said softly, almost pleading. I know, I said, voice tight. But it feels. She cut me off, lifting a hand as if to stop me, and accidentally, almost impossibly, our fingers brushed, just the tips. The electric jolt startled me, made my chest ache. We froze, neither of us pulling away immediately. She held her gaze on mine, lips parted slightly, as though she wanted to speak, but couldn't. My throat was dry, words had evaporated entirely. The moment stretched, heavy and dangerous, and then she cleared her throat, lowering her hand slowly. The rag followed, moving to clean a tabletop, but her eyes didn't leave mine. You shouldn't, she whispered again. Maybe, I said, soft enough that only she could hear. She leaned back, just a fraction, yet the room seemed to shrink around us. Her hand hovered over the counter for a beat longer than necessary, and I could feel her hesitation, her almost confession, lingering in the space between us. And then she turned, finally, her shoulder brushing mine as she walked toward the espresso machine, leaving me holding the unspoken words, the warmth of her fingers still tingling on mine. I didn't expect him to show up. Not here. Not today. I was leaning against the counter, pretending to scroll through my phone, when the bell above the cafe door chimed. She stiffened instantly, a motion so subtle I almost missed it. Her hand froze on the espresso machine lever. And then he appeared, my friend. Her son's best friend, the one whose life I'd half lived in vicarious detail through our shared stories. I watched him pause, scanning the cafe, and then his gaze landed on her. Her breath hitched, just slightly, and she tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. I didn't think you'd be here, I said, voice too loud in my own head. She looked at me, eyes wide for the first time all day. He didn't say he was coming, she murmured. I didn't know whether to feel protective or frustrated. My pulse had quickened, the tension from our barely there touches yesterday, and this morning twisting into something sharper. He waved, oblivious to the storm swirling between us. Hey, Claire, he said casually, leaning on the counter. Her smile returned, tighter than usual. I could see the effort it took, the careful control over a flutter of nerves she couldn't fully hide. I wanted to say something, anything, but my words faltered. My throat was dry, my hands idle at my sides. You two know each other, he asked casually, though the tilt of his head suggested suspicion. Yeah, she said, fumbling with the coffee cups. Well, her voice trailed off, caught between truth and omission. I could see her wrestling with the story she was supposed to tell. Her smile faltered, and suddenly she looked, human, raw, vulnerable in a way that made my chest ache. I took a half step toward her, instinctively, then stopped. My fingers itched to reach for hers again, but I knew the wrong move could ruin everything. The friend turned to me. I didn't know you worked here too. I don't, I stammered. Just visiting. The lie tasted bitter. I hated it. But the tension in the room wasn't mine alone. Hers was thicker, palpable. Her hand hovered over a cup, paused midair. Then she glanced at me. Just a flash, a micro-behavior, really. Her fingers twitching as if to brush mine, her eyes holding mine for a heartbeat longer than socially acceptable. It was a choice moment. Move closer. Step back. I could see her debating the same thing. The pull of the moment clashing with the weight of consequences. She licked her lips, shifted her stance, then exhaled slowly. Neither of us made a move. Yet everything in the room had shifted. The coffee cups, the damp air from the door, the faint scent of her perfume. It all became charged, a silent countdown to something that might happen or might never happen. And then, just like that, the decision hung there between us, heavier than words, waiting for someone, either of us, to break it. The cafe was quiet now, the afternoon rush gone, leaving only the faint hiss of the espresso machine and the lingering smell of coffee and rain. She was wiping down the counter, but her movements were slower, deliberate, each motion carrying a weight I hadn't noticed before. I stepped closer. close enough to feel the warmth radiating off her, close enough to notice the tiny shiver that ran through her when the air shifted. "Claire," I said, voice low, almost shaking. She glanced up, startled, and for a heartbeat, everything else, the barista, the door, the rain outside, vanished. Her eyes held mine, searching, cautious, daring me to step further. "I can't stop thinking about you," I admitted before I could stop myself. The words were raw, messy, and human. Vulnerable. She froze, the rag slipping from her fingers. I almost caught it, but she steadied herself, holding my gaze. You shouldn't," she whispered, a tremor betraying the calm in her tone. "I know," I said, taking a hesitant step closer. "And I'm not asking for permission. I can't pretend it's nothing." Her hand hovered near mine, caught mid-motion as if she were deciding whether to pull away or let it linger. My chest tightened. I needed to bridge that gap. I reached slowly, almost painfully aware of every micro-behavior, every hesitation. Her fingers brushed mine, just the tips, and I let them rest there. Not forceful, not demanding, just holding space for what we both knew could change everything. She exhaled sharply, leaning just slightly into the touch, though her eyes stayed wary. "This is dangerous," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know," I repeated, and this time I let the words carry more than just acknowledgement. I let them carry intent. Her gaze flicked to the window, the light dimming with the late afternoon, then back at me. I could see her battling with all the reasons not to. The friendship, the age difference, the caution she carried like armor. But beneath it, there was something unguarded, fleeting, and entirely hers. "I don't know if we can," she admitted, voice breaking slightly. "Maybe not," I said, "but I want to try, even if it's wrong." Her hand tightened over mine, almost imperceptibly, like a spark passing between us. That small pressure, fragile, fleeting, said more than either of us could voice. She let out a quiet laugh, shaky and human, the kind that comes from relief, fear, and excitement all at once. "You're impossible," she said, though her eyes softened. "And you make me feel alive," I replied. We stood there for a long moment, suspended in that quiet, messy intimacy. The unspoken acknowledgement lingered, a mixture of desire, hesitation, and trust. Not a promise, not a guarantee, just the beginning of something dangerously, beautifully real. And as the sun dipped lower outside, I realized that no matter what came next, this moment, this almost confession, this hand touching hers, would stay with me forever. The cafe had emptied long ago. The hum of the espresso machine had faded into silence, leaving only the soft tick of the wall clock and the occasional gust of wind rattling the window. I watched her from across the room as she stacked the last of the cups, her movements slower than usual, deliberate in a way that suggested she was savoring the quiet. We didn't speak much after that afternoon, not because we couldn't, but because words seemed insufficient, too rigid for what had started, too permanent for what was still unfolding. Instead, we settled into small gestures, lingering glances across tables, hands brushing briefly when passing behind the counter, quiet acknowledgement of each other's presence. I noticed everything. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear when lost in thought, how her eyes softened when she caught me looking, how she laughed at things that weren't even funny. Small, human details that left an imprint on my chest. I learned patience, maybe for the first time in my life. That some connections don't need immediate fulfillment to matter. That desire doesn't always demand confession. And that restraint, when shared willingly, can feel just as intimate as words or touches. She learned something too, I think. Something about trust, about letting someone see the parts of yourself you usually hide. I saw it in the way her posture relaxed slightly when I was near, the subtle tilt of her head in silent invitation, the tiny smirk that betrayed all her composure when she thought I wasn't looking. There were no fireworks, no dramatic declarations, only the soft ache of possibility, the tension of what might come next. And that, somehow, felt enough. We gained, or maybe uncovered, a quiet companionship, a fragile intimacy that required neither labels nor immediate resolution. We lost nothing that mattered, except perhaps the safety of pretending everything was ordinary. And in that exchange, I realized something fundamental. Love doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it lingers in pauses, in hesitations, in the shared awareness of a hand almost touching, a glance held a moment too long. As I walked home that evening, the streets were wet from a light drizzle. I smiled at the memory of her laugh, the curve of her shoulder as she moved behind the counter, the warmth of her fingers grazing mine. The story isn't finished, not really. Some things are meant to unfold slowly, quietly, in the spaces between words. And maybe that's the point. Real connections aren't rushed. They're lived in micro moments, in silences, in what's felt rather than said. Did this story stay with you? Can you remember the last time a quiet glance or a fleeting touch made you feel something irreversible? What kind of slow, real, messy love stories do you want to hear next? The ones that unfold in pauses, in almost confessions, in ordinary days made extraordinary by someone simply noticing you. Because sometimes, the stories that matter the most aren't the ones that shout. They're the ones that linger long after the last word has been spoken.